Hello, my name's Tony Burke, and today I'm joined by my colleague Megan Warren. Megan's a director of Burke & Associates Lawyers and a very experienced litigator in her capacity as a legal practitioner. Today we're talking about the impact of the COVID-19 virus on the litigation processes before the court and the way in which the different courts have responded to it, and in particular we're looking at mediation. Megan, can you give us an idea as to why mediation is so important for lawyers and for litigants in Victoria?
Thanks, Tony. Look, across Australia, it's now, in any sort of civil litigation, mediation really is almost mandatory prior to trial. Experience tells us that mediation has a really high success rate, so I'd say around sort of 95%.
Yeah, that's the usual rule of thumb.
Yeah, exactly. So that means that there's huge savings in terms of mediation, both in terms of court time, costs for the parties, and also avoids, the huge cost exercise of preparation for trial, which is really where most of the cost is usually spent.
Yeah. We've said that we're going to talk about the impact of the COVID-19 virus on litigation and mediation. To give us a better idea, can you give us a bit of a snapshot as to the default setting in Victoria for mediation?
Mm-hmm. Yes, Tony. Most civil courts and civil tribunals have some form of case management in place these days, and it's quite common, again, that happens and is mandatory prior to any sort of trial or hearing. The pre-trial orders will usually require that there is a mediation, either before a court-appointed mediator or a private mediator appointed separately by the parties. Over the years too, there's developed a significant body of knowledge around how parties succeed or how parties sort of reach an agreement. For example, the Harvard sort of BATNA analysis, which is around the best alternatives. Can
I just interrupt you there?
Yes.
BATNA is an acronym that lots of lawyers know, but for our viewers, what does BATNA stand for?
What does that stand for? So it stands for Best Alternatives to a Negotiated Agreement.
Correct. You and I both have a very clear image of what a mediation looks and feels like, and it's very much a coming together of the parties with a process. Can you talk us through the physical dynamics of a mediation in its conventional sense, please?
Yes, Tony. So although there are no fixed rules with respect to mediation, the most common way for mediation to commence is really all of the parties coming together around sort of a joint session around a large boardroom type table with a mediator acting as the initial chair. The mediator will explain the way that the discussion is to take place, including that the discussions will be confidential and that nothing can be used in any sort of court proceeding in the future as evidence. Quite commonly, the mediator will also ask each of the parties what sort of legal costs they might have incurred to get to that point.
There's often a long pause.
Yes.
When the monies are put on the table.
Yes, absolutely. So working through that and also any further costs that might be anticipated up until hearing in the matter, all of which is obviously relevant in terms of trying to reach some sort of settlement. There can also be a discussion about delays and other such court sort of related matters in terms of the dispute and the mediation. The mediator will then invite the parties to speak in terms of the dispute and their expectations, and usually that's done via legal representatives for the parties. When the various positions are outlined, there might be a debate about issues of fact and issues of law, and quite commonly the mediator will then suggest that the parties separate and go into their private rooms. The mediator will then usually shuttle between the rooms and going backwards and forwards, sometimes having sort of ad hoc meetings with the legal representatives, or sometimes ad hoc meetings with the parties themselves without the lawyers.
Which can be dangerous.
It can be dangerous and a little bit controversial, but sometimes can have great results too. So the process is entirely flexible. It's all about trying to reach a resolution. So it's a voluntary process, and anyone can walk away at any point in time without any consequences so far as the final trial is concerned. However, experience shows that most people put in an effort, and even if no settlement's reached, a range of issues are likely narrowed, which can then significantly reduce costs and potentially the length of the trial and preparation and things.
Yeah. Now, of course, that's all changed. We've gone from people being face-to-face in the hothouse of a mediation, and the physical dynamics of being present with other people.
That's right.
If you are opposed to them, is completely different now that we're dealing with
Absolutely.
A social distancing protocol.
Yeah.
Mandatory now is that the social distancing rules must apply, and so most mediations are happening remotely. People using various technologies and platforms with which to come together, and they're using Zoom, which has had an explosive growth over recent months. And there are other platforms like Microsoft Teams, which we use internally, and which is very effective, and which is very robust because it allows you to see documents on the screen as well as the faces of the participants.
Yeah.
But talking to my friends who are mediators, and I've got a lot of friends in the game.
How do you think they're coping with all of this new technology?
Well, quite well. They've had to change the way they do things, and what they're doing is using applications like Zoom, but instead of everybody being on screen and looking at everyone else all of the time, they have to do a bit of engineering and create breakout rooms and allocate people to appropriate breakout rooms so that you can have private conversations between random associations of people in mediation. And it's quite common that you can have a lot of people involved. I've had mediations where we've had up to 20 or so people, 3 or 4 factions, and so getting people moving in their conversations whilst physically remote is quite difficult, but the mediators have risen to the challenge, and they're using that technology quite effectively. We have video footage, of course, in the course of the mediation. It's not the same as looking across a boardroom table and picking up on the human characteristics of someone under pressure and trying to read the body language of someone who you're opposed to. But you can do that to some degree with the camera technology that's available with these platforms. And to compensate for the physical difficulties of a remote mediation, a lot of the mediators are being more prescriptive in advising their parties of the need to prepare what they call position statements. These are documents that are for the purpose of the mediation only. They are branded as without prejudice, and they are not to be referred to outside the mediation or in any later litigation if the dispute doesn't resolve itself. And the reports are from the mediators that is having some degree of success. I suspect because of the physical constraints, people approach an online mediation with the knowledge of the constraints and with a commitment to cut more quickly to the chase to get to the fundamental issues. Greater attention to personal presentation. If you're a lawyer or a litigant, people are going to be watching you very closely on screen, but the profile of you on screen will be probably head and shoulders, and that's about all. And so your facial tics and your personal idiosyncrasies leap out. So you need to be very mindful of the way you look, the way you dress, and the way you present on camera, because people will make judgments based on the way you look. This all indicates that it's a new skill set for the lawyers who are involved in mediation, and it's a new experience for the litigants themselves. Megan, because this is a new environment in which to represent a client, and because the physical environment is so fundamentally different, do you think it would be wise for the lawyers to prepare their clients for this new environment?
I think there's always been a role for lawyers to sort of play in that space, but even more so now. I mean, I've seen it a lot in the last couple of weeks, just having to really prepare clients for the mechanics of how the mediation will work. A lot of them are uncomfortable with having to be alone at home by themselves.
That's a key issue.
Yeah, so I mean, we always offer and would prefer the client to come in, join us here in the office, and then we will dial into the mediation, obviously observing social distancing.
So just the two of us brainstorming, what would you do to present clients to best effect in this new digital environment? Seems to me you would want your client with you, not alone.
Yes. I think so.
And you would want an appropriate background on screen.
Yes.
Any thoughts about what sort of background?
Well, I mean, in terms of a background, if it was in the office here, it could be essentially just one of our meeting rooms, rather than one of the funky Zoom backgrounds. I think having the client here absolutely is key in terms of presentation for them. They should also be presenting as if they were, say, going to a mediation or going to colloquy.
And be very careful about when it's appropriate to speak.
Yeah, and facial expressions too, what facial expressions they might be having in the, sort of off to the side. All of these things can still be seen and picked up.
And a big screen with a gallery view so you can see everybody involved in the mediation in much sharper focus.
Exactly. And able to see sort of various screens at the same time. And
highly developed skills to mute as appropriate.
Yes.
To block the screen as appropriate when you need to have a private conversation with your client. But the last thing you want would be to have the assembled multitude on the other side of the screen listening in on the private conversations.
Yeah, Zoom actually has the ability to be able to record.
True.
So what do you think about that in terms of recording in a mediation?
Most astute mediators would forbid it.
Yes, agree.
Or seek some undertaking that the video footage be destroyed after the mediation because it could be damaging.
Agree.
Quite a bit of technology for people to get their head around, and quite a few new skills for clients to become mediation ready in the new digital environment. And of course the key thing is look at the camera.
That's right. As a final thought, what do you see that this new environment and digital mediation will do for international disputes?
There's technically no difference between having a mediation online with people in the next room or people in the next planet. I can't see any fundamental difference, although it's been your experience and my experience that the embrace of technology in different parts of the world varies hugely. I think Australia is ahead of the pack with the embrace of a lot of these technologies, and other countries lag somewhat behind. Although I was interested to see in the New York Times just last week that the Supreme Court in the US has finally embraced public broadcasting of its proceedings, which is a first. I think this will now be a way in which we deal with disputes. It's likely that we will see mediators around the world offering to mediate disputes wherever they are. And the barriers between legal jurisdictions will break down considerably as the years unfold, and it will be a brave new world. The courts will be left languishing as this technology is embraced by lawyers and litigants all around the world. And I think that's a good thing.
Agreed. Thanks, Tony.
So we're both optimistic.
Thanks, everyone.